Based on my last Rick and Morty video, there seems to be a mixed interpretation of just how authentic this version of Diane is to the wife that Rick lost. Is she just an illusion fabricated to prod at Morty's greatest insecurities? Or is she an accurate replica that mirrors the real Diane's personality and mannerisms? That's why I want to figure out which interpretation is more likely by looking back through 7 seasons for clues and dissecting interviews with the cast and crew. You're watching WhitneyVision, and today we're determining how accurate to the authentic Diane the Fear Hole got. This is your spoiler warning! If you're not caught up on the past 7 seasons of Rick and Morty, hit pause on this video and come back after you finish Fear No Mort. The new season just hit the streaming service formerly known as HBO Max if you're looking for it. Let's start by putting the Fear Hole on the stand. If we can understand this pit of despair, maybe we can figure out the authenticity of the worlds it builds. One of the first things that jumps out about the Fear Hole is that it's supposedly demonic. This implies that it might be purely magical, in which case it'll be hard to argue the mechanical limitations of the hole. Magic plot devices can get away with taking as many liberties as necessary to make a plot work. So it's entirely plausible that the Fear Hole is drawing its knowledge from beyond the scope of time and space, capable of replicating anything in any way it sees as ideal for feeding. Because magic. More likely though, and I think that this is the popular understanding, is that the Fear Hole primarily operates using some form of psychic brain mapping. One person goes in, and it develops a simulation built from the deepest fears of that person's psyche. This seems to imply that a victim's memory, biases, and blind spots all factor into the Fear Hole's projection. In many ways, it can be described as an amplified nightmare come to life. In this scenario, for all we know, Diane was nothing like what Morty imagined her to be. After all, Rick didn't step foot into the Fear Hole, so it couldn't have gotten any accurate impression of Diane directly from someone who knew her. Right out the gate, we know that this Diane likely comes purely from Morty's third-party knowledge. It should also be noted that Fear Rick himself isn't 100% accurate to the genuine article. It is a near-perfect facsimile, but Morty clocking that he's subtly acting out of character is the reason he's able to escape the Fear Hole at the end of the episode. This altered Rick tells us that it's highly probable that Fear Diane also isn't a perfect one-to-one to the real Diane. But just because she's not a 100% match doesn't mean she isn't a mostly accurate reflection of Morty's grandma. Fear Rick was entirely believable as the real Rick, so much so that the simulated Rick operated outside the Fear Hole's best interests to help prevent Morty from succumbing to its power, because that's what the real Rick would do. Now, you might be able to argue that it was just trying to draw out and savor its meal here, but seeing the emotional depth the Fear Hole gave to its simulated Rick, even when Morty was elsewhere, tells me that its simulation leans towards realism. This story between Fear Rick and Fear Diane works as the central focus of the episode because it's so believable and in line with Rick's development this season. So let's talk Fear Hole Diane. Interestingly, we learned that she and Fear Hole Rick initially met after Rick allegedly built a law enforcement drone for the feds. We also discover that her master's thesis supposedly covered the subject of non-human intelligence. Additionally, this version of Diane appeared to be the fun, outgoing, adventurous one in her and Rick's relationship. While she and Fear Hole Rick are going shot for shot in a drinking contest at an alien bar, Fear Hole Diane teases Rick that her death clearly made him much cooler, because he's finally stopped being such a lightweight. But Fear Hole Diane isn't just the intelligent, cool girl of Rick's dreams. She's also clearly an incredibly nurturing wife and mother, taking time to get ice cream with her adult daughter and getting to know her granddaughter at the zoo. Although she obviously won't say no to parties and adventure, she's also still the kind of wifey who wants to chill with Rick at Showbiz Pizza on a weeknight. So the question becomes, do any of these characterizations hold any weight? And after doing a little research, truthfully, Diane's characterization has gone through a poopy butt ton of changes over the last 7 seasons, so it can be difficult to nail down a concrete canon. When Rick and Morty first aired all the way back in 2013, Dan Harmon had a completely different idea of Diane than the one depicted in Fear No Mort. Between 2014 and 2017, Harmon made several comments on Reddit and informal interviews that implied Rick had left Diane because he was smarter, stronger, and more interesting than she was, and compared Beth's mom to her simpleton husband Jerry. In a 2014 interview with Uproxx, he said, quote, "I realized the most important thing about the show for me, which is that Rick left at one point in Beth's childhood and Beth blamed her mother for Rick's absence." He also said that Beth believes that Rick, as crazy as he is the better of her two parents even though she was raised by her mother, and she blames her mother's unremarkability on her father's departure, and will do anything to keep her father back in her life. And if Morty needs to risk his life traipsing across the galaxy with her insane alcoholic father, it's better than Morty growing up in safety and ending up like her mother, or her husband Jerry, who she considers to be unremarkable and unredemptive and therefore undeserving of her affections. So is Diane just a boring, basic bitch in real life? Did the fear hole make her seem cooler than she actually was just to scare Morty? According to these old interviews, it does seem to be the case, but if you dig a little further, there's also a pretty strong case that the show's idea of Diane has evolved past this initial stage. Fair warning, this all aligns with my readings of Fearhole Diane, so my bias might be showing, but I think that the evidence is pretty solid. For starters, Morty may have more direct knowledge about Diane than we think. Enough knowledge for the fear hole to make an accurate simulation of her. All the way back in Season 1's Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, Evil Morty instructed Evil Rick to download a scan of Rick C-137's brain, and got about halfway done before he was thwarted by a swarm of loose Mortys. Evil Morty finishes the brain scan in Season 5's Rick Mirai Jack in order to gain access to Rick's knowledge of the central finite curve. And in a rare moment of trust, Rick hands the drive to Morty, finally allowing him to view his origin story. Morty watches a similar story to the fake one we saw Rick show Prombopulous Michael in Season 3's Rick Shank Redemption. After Rick rejects Prime's offer to explore the multiverse with interdimensional portal travel, Prime uses a portal to drop a bomb on Beth and Diane in Rick's garage. But instead of immediately getting to work on inventing his own gun like he showed Michael, Rick was utterly devastated for a long time after losing his wife and daughter. After growing a depression beard and becoming a full-blown alcoholic, Rick finally cracked the formula for portal travel and began killing every Rick in the multiverse on sight. He only decided to drunk drive into Prime's family's garage once the Citadel of Ricks got him to agree to stop mindlessly murdering every single variant that crossed his path. But here's the thing, Morty technically mainlined all of his grandpa's memories that day, not just the ones that we the viewers saw on screen. Even if Morty only remembers the exact montage that we saw, Rick's other memories might still be lurking in his subconscious. Evil Morty is an incredibly thorough and accurate villain, so I'm positive he left no stone unturned collecting information from Rick's brain hole, including each and every memory of his time with Diane. When Morty downloaded Rick's brain scan, he likely retained at least a portion of those memories, which would allow the fear hole to create a depiction of Diane pulled straight from Rick's first-hand knowledge of his wife. Then we have to factor in that Rick himself has hinted that his late wife was a bad bitch twice in the past 2 seasons by claiming that Summer reminds him a lot of Diane. In Season 6's Solarix, Rick tells the haunted Garage Diane AI on his home planet that Summer is a lot like her, which is why he trusts that she'll be the one to rescue him. He communicates the same sentiment to Summer in Season 7's Wet Quat Amort Rick and Summer, when he explains that he treats her like an equal because he truly respects her, and that he respects her because she's so much like her grandmother. Based on everything we know about Summer, it does seem like she and Fearhole Diane are pretty similar. Obviously, we all know that both of these wild babes can definitely hold their own at an intergalactic party. But despite her lack of 80s and 90s action movie knowledge, Summer is also whip-smart, hardworking, and strong-willed. She busts her ass to earn her grandpa's affection, and that's why he trusts her more than anyone else in the family to have his back. Unlike Morty, who often stumbles his way through adventures, Summer studies her grandpa's methods by doing his chores, learning his systems in exchange for calculated favor requests. That's why she knew how to handle the whole portal travel reset debacle in Solarix. Rick even instructs her to check her chore protocol before proceeding with her eventual rescue mission, and she repeats his directions back to him flawlessly, proving that she knows her shit and has worked hard to get there. Fearhole Diane definitely displays a lot of similar tendencies. When Rick comes on way too strong with his nihilistic NPC narrative and anti-aging serum, Diane stands up for herself, sets boundaries, and even tells her husband that maybe he never deserved her in the first place. Her master's thesis, coupled with the hint that Mr. and Mrs. Sanchez met working for the federal government, tells me that Diane was intelligent and hardworking like her granddaughter. And Fearhole Diane is definitely adventurous. Her idea of a bangarang date night is barfing her brains out after an extraterrestrial drinking contest. And I'm sure that Dee and Summer would have spent a lot of nights getting white girl wasted had she survived Rick Prime's attack. Writer Heather Campbell confirmed on Inside the Episode that, quote, "Rick is so smart and so cool, and I wanted the woman that he loved to be a match. She's sharp-tongued with him, she finds his nihilistic dark shit that he's doing funny. That would be the kind of woman that Rick would love." And I know what you're thinking. What about those Dan Harmon quotes I just talked about? He spent 3 years explaining that Diane is basically just female Jerry. But that's the beauty of life, kiddos. People change. And if those people are writers, that means that the characters that they invented might change as they do. It's no secret that Rick and Morty has evolved a lot since its inception. Thankfully, the majority of those changes have been for the better, like Jerry and Beth's marriage dynamic, for example. It seems that Dan Harmon and the current showrunner, Scott Marder, are employing a rare yet effective tactic, trusting other people and helping them bring these interdimensional stories to life. Marder said in an interview with The Verge, "I feel like a lot of success that we've had with all that has been due to holding on to a staff that just gets stronger every season. They're just so well versed in the continuity that we're all striving for. And they're all such rabid fans themselves that the elective joy just keeps sort of feeding into the new seasons and the new episodes. It's extremely easy to become so precious with your inventions that you fail to see how anyone else could possibly make them better." Something that I respect about Harmon and Marder is their ability to recognize that their team of writers know what's best for the show, especially in light of Harmon's admittedly tight embrace of Rick and Morty in past seasons. In a more recent 2023 interview, Harmon said, "I kind of feel like my job these days is to log into a Zoom and tell younger, smarter, funnier, more conscientious people a bunch of bibble-babble about my personal life in reference to the story we're trying to break. And their job is to patiently wait for me to leave the room so that they can get back to work. Call me Bob Dylan, but it seems the times they are a-changin'. And for Dan, that means that sometimes you gotta get out of the way if you can't lend a hand." Heather Campbell and the other writers who have brought Diane to life over the last couple seasons were able to make Rick's wife a much more dynamic character by pushing beyond Harmon's early ideas. Instead of leaving her in the "I hate my mom because she's dumber than my dad" box, Diane has evolved into a character worthy of Rick's endless pursuit and heartache. If she were just a milquetoast suburban mom who wasn't good enough to hold Rick and Beth's attention, Rick's defeat of Rick Prime wouldn't have nearly the emotional impact it did. And Rick's utter despondency and lack of purpose in the aftermath wouldn't have hit as hard. We're able to feel Rick's anger, his apathy, and his brokenness because Diane is so cool. If she kinda sucked, Rick wouldn't care about losing her in the first place, and we wouldn't either. One final piece of evidence towards Fearhole Diane being similar to the real Diane is a little bit inside baseball, but it's almost certainly true. The writers simply wouldn't devote an entire season finale to an entirely false character. Rick and Morty's writing staff are hyper aware of the craft of storytelling. I mean, it even feels like 80% of the show is a meta-genre savvy commentary. Any screenwriter worth their salt knows that one of the main elements of screenwriting is story economy. More so than other mediums of writing, television screenwriters are trained to keep plot to tight pacing. Episodes have to fit into exactly 22-minute runtimes, which means that scripts have to be more or less the same length for each episode. This makes page space and airtime precious, and by extension, there's a limited amount of screen time that can be devoted to characterization. Even though Rick and Morty has a 10-season contract, the rules of story economy still apply to the larger narrative. This show has been very purposeful with drip-feeding us the Rick and Diane plot, so it's safe to say that every depiction of her has to be economical to the larger story. This means we have a limited amount of scenes with her, so every bit of characterization we receive matters. Considering that the show only seems to draw from the overarching narrative once or twice a season, realistically, we'll only have 4 or 6 more opportunities for Diane to appear again before the 10 seasons are up. In other words, story economy matters with Diane more so than any other character. Sure, it might be possible that the Fearhole is developing a red herring version of Diane, but there's also an art to red herrings that I don't think aligns with this depiction of her. The purpose of a red herring is to make narrative twists more impactful. By misleading the audience, a writer heightens the drama of a climactic reveal. So if this Diane is a red herring, what twist could possibly be worth expending a whole episode's runtime on tricking us about her characterization? If the twist is that she's like Jerry, is there a way that can be more interesting or satisfying than seeing Rick mourn the loss of a bad bitch? I personally don't see how such a twist could slot into Rick's larger narrative of overcoming grief, so I'm led to believe that this is a mostly accurate version of Diane built from the memories of her that Morty had kicking around in his head. But what do you think? Is this Diane an accurate depiction of the love Rick lost? Or am I being tricked by the fear hole into believing that? Let me know in the comments below, like and subscribe to WhitneyVision, and stay tuned. I'm planning to release my backlogged breakdowns of Fiona and Cake and Rick and Morty soon. I'm Scarlet Wit, and you're watching WhitneyVision.